Hi everyone, Mr. E here, sitting on the floor of my shop, but as you can probably tell, I'm sitting here with my newest tool, the xTool P2. Now, all of these items just arrived from makeblock.com. And if you're unfamiliar with Makeblock and xTool are two sister companies where Makeblock focuses more on supporting schools and learning engineering, technology, and STEM education, where Makeblock carries xTool's products, including the P2 and the S1 and the F1 lasers, as well as a bunch of different robots and computer science resources for education. Now, of course, anybody can order from Makeblock, just like anybody can order from xTool, but I personally work directly with Makeblock because, of course, I train people how to do these things and I work with schools. So if you're looking for the links to this laser or any of the other things I show in this video, check down below. Now, in this video, we're going to unbox this laser, see what it takes to actually get it set up so it can operate safely here in my shop, and also see what it takes to get your first job up and running right out of the box, as we also talk about the xTool P2s features and why I chose to choose this laser over all the other options and all the other lasers that I've worked with, including the one that I got rid of to make this be in my shop. We also have to see if this actually fits in my shop because it's a little bit bigger than my old laser, so we'll have to see if it actually fits, and there might be some modifications that have to take place, but we'll talk about how to set this xTool P2 up, talk about the in-room ventilation system, looking at some different materials and things, as well as just see if this is the right laser for you and your makerspace. With that said, I think it's time to cut this open and see what we have.
Now, as this is pretty easy to unbox, as you'll see me cut a couple of these ties and then just peel the cardboard box and some foam away, I'm going to tell you about a couple of the xTool's features which made me choose this machine over replacing my old laser with the new Glowforge, which is its closest competitor. This laser is a CO2 laser, so it uses a CO2 tube, like many professional quality lasers, but it is a glass tube. However, it's a glass tube with an internal cooling system, as you'll see later on. It's 55 watts, which offers you a lot of power, a lot more than you typically would find anywhere near this price range, and it's also quite a lot bigger than most small entry-level desktop lasers, as the work area is 26 by 14, and that doesn't include the fact that you can install a riser and a pass-through system, which gives you a maximum of 118 inches, which is just kind of huge. Because it's a CO2 laser, you could work with a bunch of different types of materials that are safe to cut, like acrylics and woods and fibers, and it has a really clever calibration system, which makes cutting curved surfaces or warped surfaces really easy. But as you'll see later in this tutorial, one of its biggest advantages is 100% free software and no subscriptions required to get the most out of your laser.
All right, so we are unboxed, kind of. Haven't actually opened it yet, but the main part of the box is off, and it was surprisingly easy. These green tie-down straps really did most of the work. The rest of the box just sort of peeled away. And after opening it up, I did a quick lap around because I've seen on the Facebook groups that some folks xTool arrives with some cracks. I mean, this is a plastic body for the most part, apart from this top glass. So some users reported like a cracked piece of plastic, which can be expected with, a heavy machine being shipped across the world. But mine looks great. I was worried that this was really scratched, but there's a nice little protective film on this. So I think this is just about ready to go. I also took some measurements, and I can say that the measurements on the site are pretty accurate, with this being about 39 inches by 24 inches by 10 inches or so. So I'm pretty sure it's going to fit on my workbench. The only thing I will say is that the depth of 24 inches is a little misleading because the handle on the front of the lid sticks out about almost 1.5 inches. So really this is closer to 22 inches deep, which is good because I was most worried about the depth based on my countertop. And I was worried this is going to hang really obnoxiously off the front, but I think we'll be okay. Now, the first big warning sticker we have right here on the top of your laser, and it actually prevents you from opening it because it spans where the lid opens from, is a warning that you have to fill the water tank with antifreeze before you operate. So because this is a CO2 laser, as I just said in voiceover, there needs to be coolant to cool that CO2 tube. And if you don't cool the tube, it will crack, it will overheat, it will rupture, it could cause damage to other parts of the machine. So you need to have coolant circulating. Some more industrial CO2 laser brands like Universal Laser or Epilog Laser have air-cooled tubes, which the benefit of that is those tubes are typically sealed in like a metal container, and they typically have a longer life where they could last 5, 7, 10 years depending on the way that you use them. More entry-level machines or even more entry-level industrial machines like xTool, Glowforge, Boss Laser, etc. have glass tubes. The benefit of that is they're way more affordable, so replacing your tube is only a couple $100 for something like an xTool, a couple $1,000 for something like a Glowforge, but they don't last as long, and you need to have that coolant, that liquid coolant circulating. However, fortunately, the coolant tank is built in, so you don't need like a separate tank or a separate chiller. We just have to get this up on the workbench, plugged in, and up and running.
Now, as you see me struggle to lift this very heavy laser, I'm going to recommend that you do this with a friend, but I'm also going to recommend that you open the laser on the ground and take all of the accessories out, which was a poor decision that I made because I lifted it up with about 30 extra pounds worth of materials and packing items and sheet stock that's packed inside this machine, which would have made moving this a little bit easier to do.
Whew. Now, before we start using our laser, it's incredibly important to talk about safety. Now, with any type of laser engraver that you're using, whether it's a CO2 laser like the P2, a diode laser, a fiber laser, whatever, they all work through a thermal engraving process, which means that a beam of light is used to cut or engrave your material. That beam of light, of course, is burning the material to do this. Now, with any type of burning process, there are a couple hazards that you need to be aware of. Fire hazards, eye damage, and of course, inhalation of smoke. All lasers need some type of exhaust system, and I really like the P2 because it gives you quite a few options. First off, the P2 has its own internal exhaust fan, and this can be used to exhaust and suck fumes out of your P2 a short distance. So if you have your P2 next to a window and you have a short pipe going to that window or something like that, this small internal exhaust fan would work great. You can also purchase the in-room ventilation system for your P2 made by xTool, which has a special type of carbon filter that will filter out any exhaust fumes. This is a great option if you can't exhaust your laser outside. Note that you do need to replace these filters, and that will vary depending on the types of materials you cut or how much you use it. I find they work much better for fibrous materials like woods than acrylics do, so this could be an annual cost if you were putting this in your makerspace. So I personally prefer to vent things outside if that's an option. And if you have to vent things outside, but not necessarily a short distance like a window, you could use a larger exhaust system like what I have in my shop, where I use a bigger external exhaust fan to pull the smoke out of my laser and through a ventilated pipe up through the roof of my shop. Now, in terms of eye protection, you should never stare at that beam of light coming off your laser for an extended period of time. There are laser protective glasses that you can acquire, and this is a protective window that you can look through. But again, prolonged staring at the laser is never a good idea. And in terms of fire risk, I think this is where the P2 stands out above all else. First, it has an internal air compressor built right into the machine, meaning that there's a constant stream of air blowing on your engraving surface, which not only reduces the risk of fire, but also reduces scorching and poor engraving surfaces. You can also connect an external air compressor if you'd like some more airflow than what can be provided from the internal air compressor, though I think it does a great job personally. If you do hook up an external air compressor, make sure that you put some type of filtration system so that you're not putting any moisture through your air line. The P2 also will detect fire, which means it can pause itself and stop itself if it detects flames, and xTool creates an automatic fire suppression accessory, which means that it will actually extinguish the fire should there be one. But listen, if you set everything up correctly, if you're not using the wrong cutting powers, if you're not layering your material and trying to cut through multiple layers at the same time, if you have the right cutting powers, exhaust, and airflow, fire risk is very low, but it's still a possibility with these machines, which is why you should always make sure that they're set up correctly, ventilated properly, and that you should never leave your laser unattended.
So now let's open up the laser. After removing the warning sticker about the coolant tank, we'll see that there's a lot of styrofoam in here holding things in place on the bed of the machine. You have some different connection systems. So you have your exhaust connection pipes, you have some different clamps and things like that to connect some type of ventilation exhaust. And I should point out that you get extra of those if you buy the in-room filtration system as well. You have the antifreeze, which is an important component of the coolant system, but you'll need some distilled water as well, which we'll discuss in a minute. You have some different tools, some screwdrivers, some cables, a funnel for the antifreeze, and some different clamps to hold stock down on the styrofoam, all packed within this initial piece. And of course, you have some materials and your quick start and main manual as well. With that piece of styrofoam removed, we'll see that the actual gantry system for the head is fixed on both sides with these plastic clamps. After removing the thumb screws on the plastic clamps, you should be able to pull them off, which will free the head. Now, by gently pulling the gantry away, we can remove the last piece of foam, which is under one of the two cameras. And I noticed that my gantry was misaligned. When I pushed the gantry back against the wall, one part of the gantry was much closer to the back wall than the other. After checking the Quick Start troubleshooting guide, it says that this is entirely normal. And by using both of my hands on both sides, I was able to push the gantry back towards the wall to balance it evenly. Next, I had to remove the catch tray to get some pieces of material and another piece of foam out, but this was the most difficult part of the entire setup process. This Phillips screw didn't want to come out using the Phillips screwdriver that was provided, so I had to use a combination of pliers and a flathead to get the screw out. And then the catch tray was stuck because my laser was actually bottomed out on my counter, which is something that I addressed after the video. There are lots of satisfying sticky tabs to peel off, like the one covering the door lock and the ones covering these 6 screws on the inside of our laser. We have to remove these 6 screws in order to be able to access the back cover, which is where the coolant tank is. So after carefully removing these 6 screws from the inside of our laser, we could flip the laser around and remove the 5 screws from the back of the laser before removing the cover, which made me really nervous. The instructions didn't make this really clear in my opinion. It just kind of said pull the cover back, but this was held on by a lot of plastic clips. And I found that finally by pulling the clips closest to where the lid opened, then gradually working my way across, I was able to finally remove the cover without it snapping back in place. But this was definitely a really nerve-wracking part of the unboxing process. With the cover removed, you can inspect your glass CO2 tube for any cracks, look at where the coolant pipes come into the tube for any broken glass, as we don't want to flush any coolant through here as we might damage some electrical systems should the tube be broken. And here's where you can see the coolant tank off to the side, which is what we need to fill up in order to keep our laser cool. Within the Quick Start guide, you will find a table that discusses what type of coolant ratio you need to put in your tank depending on how cold your region is. We need to fill our tank twice with a concentration of antifreeze mixed with purified water. Do not just put tap water in, as that will have different purities that could damage your system. Use distilled water or another purified water source. So using a measuring cup, I added antifreeze to the tank, and I mixed this with a special distilled purified water within the ratio based on how cold my region is. After completing the first fill amount, I had to turn on my laser by releasing the emergency stop, plugging it in, and then flicking the power switch. This allowed the laser to turn on, and I was able to watch coolant flow through the tube and look for any possible leaks or cracks in my tubes as it filled with coolant. After the laser was fully powered on, which you can tell from a beep and once things stop flowing, we can turn off the laser and remove the power cord. We can then complete the second fill as described in the Quick Start manual to top off our coolant tank with the correct ratio of antifreeze and purified water based on our region's temperatures. I then resecured the back cover by pushing down the clips and putting in the 5 screws on the outside and the 6 screws on the inside before connecting the laser to my external exhaust system using one of the 3-inch duct pipes that came with the laser, which was connected to a 4-inch adapter for my existing exhaust system from my previous machine. After some satisfying plastic peeling, I finally was able to turn on my P2 with it in the proper location and with everything hooked up correctly. I have the shop lights off so you can see the LCD screen light up, which you can see this progress loading bar and some flashing lights to notify that the laser's powering on. This is not a touch screen, just a display screen, which will give you some progress, the temperature of your coolant system, and different status notifiers like whether the lid is locked, if there's a flame or an error issue, and also which way that your xTool is connected. When the laser power is on, the gantries will automatically home, as well as we'll see our work lights powered on as well, so that way we'll know that we're ready to go. After peeling some more plastic off the side, you're able to connect to your laser for the first time using the USB port before launching the xTool Creative Space. Depending on your device settings, you may need to allow this laser to connect, like you'll see this accessory warning I have on my Mac. And then we're in the Creative Space, which is a 100% free app with no subscriptions required at all whatsoever to utilize your machine. We can start by creating a new project window, which is where you would not only design things, but also import an existing design. And then we can click the Connect Device button to search for our laser. My xTool popped up immediately under the USB area, and then I was prompted to go to a safety training and also update the firmware. The firmware only took a few minutes to download and update for my laser, and then I flipped through the safety training later on, which showed me how to operate our laser safely with ventilation, never leaving it unattended, and always making sure that we utilize materials which are safe for laser cutting and engraving processes. Once the firmware update was complete, we can close this window and we'll see a picture of our bed using one of the two cameras. I then launched the settings to take a look at the different settings, and one setting that you may need to adjust is the exhaust fan. This toggle switch will determine whether the internal exhaust fan is used, and if you have another exhaust system like the in-room filtration system or a larger exhaust system like I'm using, you need to turn off your internal exhaust fan or else you'll actually create a pressure difference with two different fan speeds, and this will reduce your smoke exhaust performance. You also might want to adjust your LED brightness or the sensitivity of the automatic flame sensor, or even perhaps putting your device on Wi-Fi if that's something that you'd like to do, or a different way that you'd like to connect other than going through USB. Next, we're going to design our first thing, and you'll notice on the side that we have quite a few design features, such as importing an existing design, which could be a raster or a vector image, as well as drawing some basic shapes. And we're going to start by just drawing a basic shape here using a rectangle tool. You'll notice on the right-hand side that once you have a shape selected that you can adjust the different types of processes, whether you're scoring, which is like a partial light cut, engraving, which is like if you're burning into your material, or cutting all the way through. And we can also select our material from our existing library. What I like a lot when you select an existing material is you get some default settings that you can work with. And so far, I've found these to be incredibly accurate, even if I'm using materials that I didn't purchase from xTool. I also love the fact that you have a lot of different shape tools, lots of existing clip art, lots of different shapes and patterns and things like that you can pull into your design and immediately start working with. And these are all high quality vector clip art images that are easy to manipulate and work with. So I pulled in this tree, and by default it was actually set to engrave, which was kind of handy. And then I went and I selected my text box tool to allow me to create some basic text for this first little Hello World project and my first engraving and cutting experience with my xTool laser. You'll see that the text and shapes are set to score by default, but you can easily toggle them to be engraved like any of the clip art. You'll also notice this image in the cut settings. You can actually click on this image to determine how dark you want your engraving to be based on the picture rather than having to punch in different power and speeds, which makes this way more intuitive to use. You can easily drag and scale your models or scale your parts in your design manually like I'm doing here, but you'll also see that you have some basic editing toolbars up top, like to select different fonts, select different font sizes, or even set specific dimensions, whether you're working in millimeters or inches as well. For my Hello World tag, I decided that I'm just going to put a little tree clip art next to some text on a simple rectangle for a nice, easy project to cut and engrave. Honestly, I really wasn't too worried about size for this project, so I wasn't really working with dimensions too much, but I loved how simple it was, even though I've never used this program before, to set specific sizes, set scaling, even put rounded corners on my rectangle to make it look just a little bit nicer using a really simple and intuitive interface. And again, this design software is entirely free. No subscriptions are required at all whatsoever to use this program or to get the most out of your machine. I also then later experimented with importing designs from Illustrator or Inkscape, and that worked just as well as designing in the program. But honestly, this is such a powerful and simple to use design program, it really made designing this project super easy and simple. Next, I was able to open up my laser and put in my material. And for my first cut, I'm using some sample basswood plywood that came with my laser and was part of my existing material library. So after ripping open this package of sample materials, I was able to simply put this on my slatted bed. Now, if you're using the honeycomb bed instead of the slats, you get an easier system to align and square up your material, so that way you know that everything's nice and square, and it's kind of difficult to do that as you're seeing here on the slats. But thanks to the camera alignment system, that's really not a huge deal. Back in the software, you'll see that I'm still looking at the slat bed, even though I've just loaded my material. But we get this little pop-up saying that the image may have changed because we opened and closed the lid. So once I'm able to press this camera icon to manually refresh, we'll now see our material here using the far away camera. And this is one of two cameras. So later I'll show you how to use the close-up camera, but the far away camera gives us a nice image of our stock, which allows me to easily reposition my design on the stock. I should also point out that it is possible to hide the slat bed altogether, which makes designing a little bit easier, but I didn't know that when I first created this video. Once everything's aligned and my material has been selected, I can click Go to Process, and we'll get a rendering of what the path looks like, which will show us the actual tool path and how the laser will go about creating this through this simulation. It'll also show us how long the projection will take for cutting and engraving our design, and you can of course speed this up or slow this down, so that way you'll preview everything to make sure that it looks as it should. Once you're happy with your rendering, we can push the Start button, which will send the file to our laser, and the Start button will flash blue and the laser will beep to let us know that it's ready. When your laser's running, the Start button is also the Pause button to stop it. Note that the lid is locked, so opening the lid cannot happen unless it's been paused. Now I'll show you this at both full speed and at high speed, so that way you can get a full sense of what the engraving process looks. But as you can see, my laser head is panning from side to side to engrave first. Engraving always happens before cutting and scoring, so that way your material won't shift during the manufacturing process. As the laser is in progress, you can see a little loading bar on the LCD screen, as well as monitor the amount of time left in the xTool Creative Space software during the machining process. You also want to monitor your smoke to make sure that it looks like it's evacuating properly. Smoke should not really sit inside your machine. It should constantly be pulled through your exhaust system. If you have a buildup of smoke, not only can that cause a possible ventilation risk, a fire risk, but it will also make your mirrors and lenses more dirty and require you to clean them more frequently. As you're cutting, you can see that there's a much higher amount of smoke during the cutting process than the engraving process. What you're seeing here is too much smoke. I did not have the correct exhaust system set up initially when I first tested this out, and that caused too much smoke to sit in my machine and also flow forwards rather than flowing towards the back ventilation. You want to make sure that you have better evacuation than what you see here, or else you could have a possible risk.
All right. Turn my exhaust off so you can hear me. That worked perfectly. First try, I didn't have to do any special calibration or anything like that. Once it turned on and it calibrated by itself, that was incredibly easy to do. Now, if your first engraving attempt doesn't come out this effectively, that is okay. Don't stress out. Don't think that your machine is overly broken or things like that. It does come with a self-check guide with different troubleshooting categories that you can look into, which is natural. When you ship a machine that's this big across the world, it could become jostled, it could become discalibrated, and this walks through all the different steps to actually fix the gantry more than what I had to do earlier in this video, but also checking your belts and your pulleys and all the things like that. Okay, I'm back. And now this is me actually 2 weeks later after having the P2 set up in my shop and trying a number of things. And I have to say, I still adore this machine as much as I did on the very first job that I completed. I've tested out a bunch of different materials, different thickness woods, cardboards, plywoods, veneer coated woods and materials like that, whether it's MDF fiber boards or alderwood and synthetic laser engraving materials, as well as a range of acrylics. And of course, because this is a CO2 laser, this can handle clear acrylic or color acrylic or white acrylic and any other materials that you'd like just fine. I haven't gotten into any of the major accessories yet, like the rotary module or things, but stay tuned. I did engrave some really thick pieces of material, and I liked how easy it was to adjust whether I was engraving on the slats or actually removing the lower catch tray to put a thicker piece of material in. I actually think one of my favorite things about the xTool P2, and I guess this goes for probably the whole xTool line, is the xTool Creative Space software. This is by far the easiest laser engraving software I've ever used. I find it to be way more intuitive than the Glowforge program, and of course, because xTool doesn't charge for subscriptions and things like that, it's really powerful. Not only do I like it to just control and make settings on how to adjust for engraving and things like this, which is super easy through their previews, and I actually find to be moderately accurate most of the time, it's actually a really powerful and simple graphic design and vector design space. You can open up photos. You can vectorize raster images through like a live tracing feature, which is something you'd find in a more advanced program like Adobe Illustrator. And I've really been blown away with the software as a whole. The software also works great with this machine. The only problem I've actually run into, which I'm not sure how much is the machine versus me, is just keeping it on my Wi-Fi. I've placed this on my Wi-Fi network a number of times and it keeps forgetting the Wi-Fi network or falling off the Wi-Fi network. And after talking to xTool support, they told me to check that it's a 2.4 gigahertz connection, which it is. They told me to check the distance, which it's not far. The router is right over there behind the camera. But for whatever reason, no matter how many times I put it on my network, it seems to fall off of my network. And I'm in the process of running an Ethernet cable over so that way I can just connect more accurately. But in the meantime, the USB port connection has always worked well. And I suppose that's something that I'm just trying to figure out on how to make that a little bit better on my side. Something else that I purchased for my laser, which is linked below, is a dust cover. So that way when it's in my shop, I can keep it covered and even put a piece of foam over it just to protect it when I have other projects and things going on. So you can find the link for that off Amazon below in the video description. So to wrap up and summarize my unboxing and initial review of the xTool P2, I adore this machine. It is a phenomenal laser. And I'm saying that as somebody who's worked with 15, 16 different laser brands, probably 45 or so different lasers from the big names like Epilogue, Universal, Trotec, industrial machines like Omtech and Boss, hobby machines like Glowforge, Dremel, FS Laser, and I'm just blown away. It is really like a prosumer, user-friendly industrial machine. It's really powerful. It's really large for desktop machines go. You have the air compressor built in, which is a pretty fantastic accessory, so I don't have to hear my compressor running all the time. And it's so easy to use. The software makes it so easy to design, even if you have no prior design experience. The gallery allows you to browse and grab tons of models and things, something like you'd find on Thingiverse for 3D printing. It's just a really enjoyable machine. And over the last 2 weeks, I've loved having it in my shop. And I'm really excited for all the projects that I have planned. You can, of course, stay tuned on my channel for upcoming tutorials and videos and guides. I have more videos coming out soon that talks about the calibration and troubleshooting that you might need to do on your machine, as well as the general maintenance. It's really important to maintain your laser to ensure safe operation is continued. This includes keeping it clean, removing any excess particles or things like that that are flammable from your catch trays, as well as cleaning your lenses and your mirrors, which is a delicate but crucial process. But if you're considering the xTool P2 for your makerspace, at home, at school, in your shop, in your business, or whatever, I would absolutely recommend it, as I think it's really one of the most versatile and capable machines you can get anywhere near this price point. So thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more.